Typically, when we look at a map, the area that we see represented by a country on the map is the area that that country takes up on the surface of the earth. But there is an exception to that, and that is cartograms. On cartograms, the area taken up by a country on a map is equal to some attribute of that country. In this example here, it's population. So the areas with the largest population, such as India and China, would take up the most area on this map, and areas with lesser populations, such as some of the African countries, would be much smaller. In this sort of distortion here for this cartogram, it's almost like different countries are inflated or deflated with air, depending on how big their population is. But the key here is that the size of each of those polygons would be equivalent to the representative population of that area with respect to how it compares to sizes of other countries. So one way to do it is kind of this inflation-deflation way. Another way is to just break it down into a lot of little grid cells or pixels, and this shows the same theme. We're looking at a cartogram of population. In this case, once again, China shows up very large, India shows up very large, there's the United States. But they're trying to more preserve the shape of the countries by just putting in the squares so it somewhat represents the shape and also shares the borders with the places like Canada and Mexico that in fact it does share the borders with on an area map of the world as well. Here's another one. This is showing lack of access to safe water and where that is the biggest problem. And as we can see in this one, Europe and North America, Australia, they completely disappear. They're just nothing. But in other countries, there's some issues, and we can kind of see by both the size and the color here where those issues are the most severe. A lot of cartograms have made our presidential elections because a president can win relatively small areas of the country and still win the elections because of the way that electoral college votes are counted. So this first one's from the Obama-McCain election, and on the left is shown the map with Democratic voting districts in blue and Republican voting districts for McCain in red, and we can see that there's a lot more red on that map than blue, but a lot of that red area is less populated areas, such as in the central United States. Those areas really shrink up if we make a cartogram of the election, and the areas in blue where there's lots of electoral votes, like California here and New York over here, certainly swell up when we do it based on electoral votes instead of the area that's shown on the map. Here's another way to make it. We can just kind of, this example here doesn't try to exactly match the boundary, such as the boundary between Washington here and Oregon here, but it just kind of scales each of the states so that the relative size here is represented by the number of votes in the electoral college that they have. So areas like New York and California are much bigger, and then other areas are much smaller, like Idaho and Montana, than the relative size there would really be. So once again, just different ways of changing the size of these different map units in order to make a cartogram of some other information besides how much area they cover. This is a famous cartogram. This is the London subway map. And on this London subway map, it's not the area that's distorted, but the distance. These stations right in central London are actually much closer than are shown on this map, and these ones out in the further distances away from central London are actually much further spaced than they're shown on this map here. So in this case, it's not the area of the map that's being played with, but the spacing between the stations. Because people aren't typically measuring distance on this map, they just need to know how many more stops until their station, and where should they get off, and where should they transfer to another train. And cartograms can also show other things. In this example here, this is how much at a certain time it cost to fly from London, England. We can see getting to Paris was fairly cheap, 68 pounds, and then it kind of increased away from there. But for example, it's just as cheap to fly from London to New York as it is to fly from, or it's actually cheaper than flying from London to Rome, even though Rome is a much shorter distance from London. So this is not trying to show distance in distance terms. This cartogram is trying to show distance and how much it's going to cost you to get there on an airline leaving from Paris. So once again, in this example here, distance is distorted, but that, in this case, when distance is distorted, the entire map is distorted, and of course it's highly generalized. This doesn't really look anything like the United States, but we kind of get an idea. Here's New York here, and here's Miami down here. But other areas are more distorted because it costs more to fly to those areas.